Coffee maker clicked off at exactly 6:15, same as it had every morning for the past 11 years. I poured myself a mug, the blue ceramic one my wife picked up at a roadside shop in Vermont, the summer before everything changed, and I stood at the kitchen window watching the neighbours' sprinklers run. They always ran too long. Wasted water. I'd thought about mentioning it 100 times and never had. That's what retirement does to you. You notice things. Small things. The sprinklers. The way the mail carrier skips the Halverson house on Tuesdays. The exact pitch of your own silence. My name is Earl. I'm 67 years old, and I live alone in the house where my daughter learned to ride a bike, where my wife planted roses she never got to see bloom a second time. Connie passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end, fast enough that we never really had time to say the things we meant to say, slow enough that I watched her disappear. After she was gone, my daughter Brianna and her husband Stanton stepped in, called more, came by, brought food I didn't eat. They lived about 40 minutes north of me, up in Westchester, in a house they'd bought 3 years earlier, bigger than anything a couple in their mid-30s should reasonably afford, but Stanton had always moved money around in ways I didn't fully understand. Finance. Something with funds. He explained it to me once, and I nodded and understood none of it. They were attentive in that first year. I'll give them that. Then things quieted down, the way they do. Brianna still called on Sundays, usually around 4, right when the football pre-game got interesting, which I always assumed was an accident and eventually decided was not. We'd talk for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, the weather, her book club, whether I was eating enough. She never asked about Connie directly. Neither did I. It was an agreement we'd reached without discussing it. Stanton I saw less. He was always travelling or in meetings or just busy in the vague, permanent way that some men are. When I did see him, he was pleasant. Handshake firm, smile quick, eyes somewhere else. He called me Earl, but it always came out sounding like a word in a foreign language, technically correct, slightly off. I didn't think much of it. Some people are just like that. The invitation came on a Wednesday in early October. I was on the back porch with my mug, a different mug, the green one, because the blue one was in the dishwasher, watching a cardinal work over the bird feeder I'd refilled twice that week. The phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was Brianna. A text, not a call, which was unusual for a Wednesday. "Dad, would you want to come up for dinner Saturday? Stanton's been wanting to spend some time with you. We'd love to have you." I read it twice, then I looked at the Cardinal. He didn't have an opinion. Stanton's been wanting to spend time with me. I tried to remember the last time Stanton had expressed any desire to spend time with me and came up mostly empty. There was a barbecue in July, but that was Brianna's doing. She'd organised the whole thing. And Christmas, but Christmas doesn't count. I typed back, "I'd like that. What time?" She responded in under a minute. 6 o'clock. I'm making your pot roast recipe. Don't bring anything. Connie's pot roast. My daughter had learned it from her mother, who had learned it from her own mother, some chain of women, handing a recipe down through decades like a relay baton. The fact that Brianna was making it, that felt significant. Warm, even. I told myself I was reading too much into things. Saturday came the way October Saturdays do in the Hudson Valley, clear and cold in the morning. The sky that particular shade of blue that only appears for about 3 weeks a year. I drove up 9A with the windows cracked, maple trees burning orange along the ridge. I'd bought a bottle of Merlot at the wine shop on Elm. Not expensive, not cheap, the kind of thing you bring to dinner at your daughter's house. Their driveway was freshly sealed. I noticed that immediately. New landscaping too. Those ornamental grasses along the front walk that I'd read about in some magazine Connie had subscribed to. The house looked maintained in a way that took money and attention. Stanton answered the door. "Earl." The handshake. The quick smile. "Come on in, we've got a fire going." He looked well. He always looked well. Tall. Good posture. The kind of jaw that reads as reliable on first impression. He was wearing a collared shirt. Casual. The sleeves rolled up. I noticed he was holding a glass of red wine, and that he hadn't offered me anything yet. "Let me take your coat," he said. The house smelled like pot roast and wood smoke and something else I couldn't immediately identify, something sharper underneath. Could have been cleaning products. Could have been the new hardwood they'd put in. There was new hardwood, I noticed, a warm walnut colour that ran the length of the main floor. New floors, I said. Just finished last month, Stanton said. Whole main level. Been meaning to do it for 2 years. They look good. Thanks. Brianna picked the stain. We stood in the foyer for a moment past comfortable. Then he gestured toward the living room. Brianna appeared from the kitchen in an apron, Connie's apron, the old one with the faded strawberries, which hit me somewhere below the ribs, and she crossed the room and hugged me with both arms. Dad, you look good. I look exactly the same, I said. She laughed. She smelled like rosemary and flour. Come sit down, dinner's about 40 minutes out. We settled in the living room. Stanton brought me a glass of the Merlot I'd brought, which I appreciated, and poured himself a fresh one. The fire was going, gas logs, but they did a reasonable imitation of the real thing. Brianna sat across from me with her own glass and asked about the drive, about the house, about whether I'd had the furnace serviced yet. I had not had the furnace serviced yet. I'll get to it, I said. You say that every year, she said, and every year I get to it eventually. She gave me the look, the same look Connie used to give me, which was either genetic or learned and probably both, and we moved on. Dinner was good. Brianna had the pot roast right, the vegetables soft, but not collapsed, the gravy dark and rich the way her mother made it. We sat at the dining room table, which they only used for guests, the good plates out, candles lit. Stanton was pleasant. He asked about my neighbour Dave's knee surgery because I'd mentioned it once in passing, and apparently he'd filed it away. He talked about a hiking trail up in Harriman State Park he'd been meaning to try. He told a story about a work trip to Chicago that was genuinely funny, the kind of funny that doesn't feel performed. I thought, maybe I've misjudged him. I was on my second glass of wine when my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. Not unusual. My buddy Phil sometimes texted during dinner, time zones forgotten, and my doctor's office had been sending appointment reminders. I almost ignored it. Something made me look. Unknown number, no contact name. The message was short. Mr. Whitfield, please excuse yourself and leave the house right now. Do not say anything to your daughter or her husband. Go to your car and drive away. This is not a joke. Please go now. You are in danger. I read it twice. The candle on the table caught the edge of my wine glass and threw a small prism of light across the wall. Brianna was saying something about a book club's next pick. Stanton was nodding, cutting another piece of roast. My heart was doing something strange. I made myself breathe. I looked at Stanton, who was now refilling Brianna's glass, his attention on the bottle. Then I looked at the text again. You are in danger. 67 years old. I've had 3 fender benders, 1 appendectomy, and 1 conversation with an IRS auditor that I would rate as the most frightening experience of my life. I am not by nature a person who panics. But something in that message, the formality of it, Mr. Whitfield, the repetition, please go now, landed differently than a prank would have. Excuse me, I said. My voice came out normal. I don't know how. Bathroom. Brianna pointed down the hall without interrupting her sentence. I walked to the bathroom, closed the door, ran the faucet, and stared at my own face in the mirror for 10 seconds. Then I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in 30 seconds. My name is Gloria. I work for your son-in-law. I cannot explain everything by text. Please just leave. I will call you when you are safe. Please. Gloria. I didn't know any Gloria. I didn't know the names of anyone who worked for Stanton. He'd never introduced me to a colleague. I turned off the faucet. I walked back down the hall and stood in the doorway of the dining room. Brianna was laughing at something. Stanton had his arm along the back of a chair, easy and comfortable. Everything looked perfectly normal. Everything looked perfectly normal. Everything looked like a Saturday dinner with my daughter. I picked up my sport coat from the back of my chair. I'm so sorry, I said. I just got a message. My neighbour's son. Dave's had some kind of setback with the surgery. I shook my head like a man receiving unfortunate news. I really think I need to go check on him. He doesn't have anyone close by. Brianna's face shifted, concern, then disappointment. Dad, can't you just call? He doesn't hear well on the phone. I won't be long, but I should go. I picked up the Merlot bottle, still about a third full, and set it back down. Thank you for dinner, sweetheart. It was perfect. Connie would have been proud of that pot roast. Something moved across Brianna's face when I said Connie's name, something I couldn't quite read. Stanton stood, which surprised me. I'll walk you out. No. Sit, finish dinner. I'm sorry to run out like this. I kept my voice easy. I kept my pace easy. I got my coat on in the foyer and led myself out the front door and walked to my car and got in and pulled out of their freshly sealed driveway and turned left onto their street, and I didn't exhale until I was 2 blocks away. My hands were shaking. I pulled over under a streetlight on a quiet block and picked up my phone. It rang once. Mr. Whitfield. A woman's voice. Mid-40s, maybe. Careful. Thank you for leaving. I'm sorry to have frightened you. Who are you? I said. Tell me exactly who you are and how you got my number. A pause. My name is Gloria Reyes. I've been Mr. Stanton's personal assistant for 4 years. I have access to his contacts. Your number was in his files. Why are you calling me? Another pause, longer. Because last Tuesday I walked into his office to drop off documents and he didn't hear me come in. He and a man I didn't recognize were talking about you. Her voice was careful and steady, like someone who'd rehearsed this and was trying not to lose her nerve. About your wife's life insurance policy, and about a power of attorney document, and about they used the phrase, speeding up the timeline. The street light above me hummed. Speeding up the timeline, I repeated. I know how that sounds. I went home that night and I told myself I'd misunderstood. But then I found something in the filing system the next day. A document drafted by a law firm I didn't recognize. It had your name on it and Stanton's name, and it was about your estate. It was dated 2 months ago. He never mentioned this to you? No. There was something else, she said. A billing statement. From a medical consulting firm. I looked them up. They don't have a public-facing practice. They're not the kind of firm you hire for health advice. I sat with that for a moment. Gloria, I said, do you understand what you're telling me? Yes, sir, she said quietly. I think I do. She was scared. I could hear it underneath the composure. She'd done something tonight that could cost her job, her reference, maybe more. She'd called a stranger because she'd decided it was the right thing to do, and that kind of decision doesn't come easy to anyone. Okay, I said. Okay. I sat in my car under that streetlight for a long minute. The houses on the block were lit up warm from inside. Someone walking a dog went past on the sidewalk without looking at me. Then I called my attorney. Louis Garfield has been my attorney for 22 years, since Connie and I bought the house in Dobbs Ferry. He does estate planning mostly. He does not handle criminal matters. But he is exactly the kind of person you call at 7:30 on a Saturday night when you don't know who else to call. He answered on the 4th ring. I told him everything. He was quiet through most of it, and then he said, Don't go back to the house tonight. Call the non-emergency line for the Westchester County PD. I'll make some calls in the morning. You believe me, I said. I believe you, he said. And I've handled 3 estates in the past 10 years where a surviving spouse had concerns about undue influence from adult children. This is not as uncommon as people think. I called the non-emergency line. The officer I spoke to took my information, asked me several questions I answered as completely as I could, and told me a detective would follow up within 48 hours. 48 hours is a long time when you just had dinner with people you suspect wanted to harm you. I drove home in the dark, the radio off, the windows up. The highway lights slid past in long orange strokes. I kept thinking about the pot roast, about Connie's apron, about whether my daughter was part of this, whether she knew, whether she was being manipulated by Stanton the same way I apparently had been, or whether the look on her face when I said Connie's name was something more complicated than I wanted to believe. I didn't sleep well. What I did do, first thing Sunday morning, was call my brother-in-law Owen in Phoenix, Connie's brother, a retired judge, who had never liked Stanton and had told me so exactly once, politely, and then never brought it up again. Owen listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is a skill that comes from decades on the bench. When I finished, he said, "I'm going to fly out." "You don't have to do that." "Earl," he said, "I'm coming." He was there by Tuesday. By then, Louis had made his calls. A white-collar crime attorney named Patricia Chen, not in the file, a different Patricia, someone Louis knew, had reviewed the documents that Gloria photographed and sent at considerable personal risk from Stanton's office system. The document purporting to update my estate planning had Stanton listed as primary beneficiary, superseding a will I'd written with Louis 8 years ago. It also contained language granting Stanton power of attorney over my financial and medical decisions under certain conditions relating to my cognitive capacity, assessed by a physician I had never met or agreed to. There was also a second document, a supplemental life insurance policy, not my original one, a second one taken out approximately 14 months after Connie's death, naming Stanton as sole beneficiary. The originating signature on the application looked like mine. I have never signed any such document. Patricia Chen used the word forgery on our first call. She used it precisely and without drama, the way doctors use clinical words for serious things. I sat with Owen in my kitchen, the blue ceramic mug in my hands, and felt something that I didn't have an exact word for. Not quite grief, and not quite anger. Something older. The specific weight of being deceived by someone you chose to trust. Not fully, not without reservation, but enough. Enough to sit at their dining room table and eat and say thank you and mean it. "Did Brianna know?" Owen asked. "I don't know," I said, and I didn't. That was the hardest part. 2 weeks after that Saturday dinner, Westchester County detectives executed a search warrant on Stanton's home office and his firm's servers. They found the correspondence. They found the relationship with the fraudulent documents firm. They found communications between Stanton and the medical consulting company regarding, as the detective explained to me, certain pharmaceutical compounds and their detectability in standard tox screens. I will not pretend I understood everything about what came next. I had a lawyer for that. What I understood was this: Stanton had been under financial pressure for over a year that Brianna did not know about. A series of investments that had gone wrong quietly, in ways he'd hidden from her. My estate, the house in Dobbs Ferry, Connie's life insurance, my pension, the 401k, I'd spent 31 years building as a civil engineer for the state, was, in someone's calculation, a solution to a problem. Stanton was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Brianna called me an hour later. I picked up. She was crying in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child, messy, past any attempt at composure. She said she didn't know. She said it many times. She said it many times. She said she felt like the floor had disappeared under her. I believed her. I still believe her. I've thought about it many times since, looked at it from every angle I can find, and I believe her. She was not part of it. She was, in some ways, also a victim of the same calculated performance. A man who had married her for reasons that included, somewhere in the accounting, what she stood to inherit. That's the part that keeps me up some nights. Not what he tried to do to me. What he did to her, just by being who he was, day after day in her house. We talked for a long time that Tuesday. It was the longest real conversation we'd had in years. Gloria Reyes lost her position, as she'd known she would. She'd understood that the moment she decided to type that first text message, she typed it anyway. I hired her. She manages my calendar, my correspondence, my increasingly complicated medical appointments, and the renovation project I've finally started on the back porch. She is organized and direct, and she makes very good coffee, and she has never once asked me if I'm eating enough. She also introduced me to her uncle, a contractor, who charged me a fair price for the porch, and who told me, unprompted, that the sprinkler system in my front yard was set to run 15 minutes too long. Some things, it turns out, are worth noticing. Owen flew back to Phoenix with a standing invitation to come back for Thanksgiving, which he has accepted for the past 2 years running. He sits at the same dining room table where I grew up eating Sunday dinners, and he tells long stories about Connie that I've heard before and never get tired of hearing. Brianna comes sometimes too. We're rebuilding something, she and I, carefully, at a pace that feels right. She stopped by last month with a new batch of Connie's pot roast, and we ate it at my kitchen table, just the two of us, with no candles and no performance of anything. It tasted exactly right. The blue ceramic mug is still in its spot in the dish rack. I don't know that I'll ever move it. Some things earn their place just by staying. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in the house where my daughter learned to ride a bike, where my wife planted roses that bloom every June without being asked. I am not a man who panics. I am not a man who is willing to disappear quietly into someone else's plan. And I am, it turns out, not as alone as I thought. I still think about the moment I read that text. The candle was throwing light across the wall, Brianna was laughing, and everything looked exactly like a normal Saturday night. That's the part that stays with me. How ordinary it all appeared on the surface, and how much was moving underneath it. I've thought about Gloria a lot since then. She didn't know me. She owed me nothing. She had every practical reason to stay quiet, keep her job, keep her reference, keep her life as it was. But she'd walked into that office, heard something she wasn't supposed to hear, and made a decision in the privacy of her own conscience that most people never have to make. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. What she did took a kind of moral weight that's hard to name without it sounding bigger than it is. She simply knew the difference between right and wrong when it counted, and she acted on it when it cost her something. I think that's what real character looks like, not the easy version. Not the kind that shows up when it's convenient, but the kind that shows up on a Tuesday afternoon in a filing room when no one is watching. And then there's what I had to do. People have asked me since, how did you stay calm at that dinner table? How did you excuse yourself without giving anything away? I don't have a glamorous answer. I've just lived long enough to know that the moment you panic is the moment you lose the room. My 31 years as a civil engineer taught me that when something is wrong with a structure, you don't yell about it. You get yourself to a safe place first, then you assess, then you act. I applied that same logic to my own life that Saturday and it held. But the part nobody talks about, the part that actually required the most from me, was the waiting, the 48 hours before detectives followed up, the days while Louis made calls and Patricia Chen reviewed documents, the weeks before the arrest, sitting inside that uncertainty, not knowing how it would resolve, not knowing what Brianna knew or didn't know. That kind of waiting requires something different than calm. It requires a willingness to stay steady when you have no guarantee that things will go right. That's not patience. Patience is passive. What I'm talking about is holding your ground when the ground itself feels unsteady, because you've decided that giving up is not an option you're willing to consider. What I know now from the other side of it, the people who tried to take advantage of me were betting on a version of me that doesn't exist. They assumed I was lonely enough to stop paying attention, old enough to stop asking questions, grateful enough for the invitation that I wouldn't look too closely at the table I was sitting at. They were wrong about all of it. I'm 67 years old, and I live in the house where my wife planted roses that bloom every June. The blue ceramic mug is still on the dish rack. Gloria Reyes makes very good coffee, and Owen is coming for Thanksgiving again. And Brianna brought pot roast last month, and we ate it in the kitchen, in the quiet that comes between people who are slowly learning to trust each other again. Some things get taken from you, some things you build back. And some people, the glorious of this world, remind you that decency is not extinct. You just have to be paying attention when it shows up.